It's my great pleasure it's my great honor to introduce Professor Groner from University of Virginia, and he is a very important scholar in our field. He mainly works on Japanese Tendai Buddhism, medieval Japanese Buddhism, and also precepts and Tendai studies, so it's more like doctrinal and historical kind of approach to Buddhist studies. And he has influenced my scholarship a lot, and I believe he also influenced many young people's scholarship a lot. And he received his PhD from Yale University. That his teacher is also a very important scholar called Stanley Weinstein, if you ever heard of him. And then they are going to have an important conference in memorial of Professor Weinstein. So he has trained many good scholars, including Professor Groner and my own supervisor. So I'm really happy to be able to take him here to give us just an overview of this Japanese precepts. And what else should I say? And then Professor Groner, he already retired, but after his retirement, he even became more busier, because many different universities would invite him to be visiting professors to give talks or lectures for one semester. So he has been visiting UC Berkeley, that is where he just came, and then for example like Stanford and UC Santa Barbara, I guess.
No, University of Southern California.
Southern California. So. And we hope he will be in Taiwan next time, and perhaps next year. We are hoping to get him here to run some lectures, many lectures for one semester. So this is, I guess, did I forget anything important?
No. You didn't tell them how boring I was.
Oh, but they will tell after your talk. Yeah. So the talk will be in English today, but you have the Chinese summary that I made to give you as a handout already. And also we will break the talk into two parts. The first part will be the introduction to precepts. I mean, he didn't prepare this at the beginning, but then he was very kind that after the second talk he realized that probably the audience doesn't have a very thorough background of Japanese precepts, of Buddhist precepts in general. So he spent extra time to make this introduction part, that is your English handout. So because it's newer, I mean, in terms of his preparation, so I didn't translate that. So you are just going to follow the English handouts when he was talking about this first part. So it's an introduction to the precepts. And then the second part will be the main focus of his study. And for that, he has a paper, and then I translated the key points into Chinese. So the Chinese handout is the second part. So we will have a short break in between, and then you can raise questions about the first part, and then we will continue to the second part. Okay. 好，那我用中文介绍一下那个Groner老师。那就是 Groner老师，他是专长是这个日本的天台宗，然后跟戒律，然后就是中世纪的日本佛教。那就是他的那个博士是在耶鲁大学拿的，那他的那个指导教授是一个很重要的一个西方的学者。那就是因为这个学者 耶鲁大学这个教授训练了非常多重要的那个就是学者，但是他训练的学生大概就是光文老师的年纪了这样子。然后所以他们下个礼拜会在日本居者大学还有一个就是纪念那个 Stanley Weinstein 的研讨会。有人听过依法吗？佛光山那个没有啊，依法老师也是那个 Stanley Weinstein 的学生这样。然后所以他的这个做就是佛教研究的方法，它的一个很大的特色，它就是并重义理跟历史。那这两个角度，他都会很仔细的去考量，如果他在做任何一个题目这样子。那这种研究的角度，就是影响到非常多的我这一辈的这个研究人员这样子，包含在我里面。那他有非常多的书跟文章，然后他从那个维吉尼亚大学退休之后呢，就更忙了。所以他就去到很多地方，都邀请他做那个讲座教授，就包含史丹佛，然后那个南加大，然后他刚刚是从那个伯克莱过来的这样子，那都是在那边待一个学期。那我们就是希望他也之后可以来台湾，对不对？对，就是来台北这样子。对，那就是他今天的演讲，因为就是本来他是有一个。只有一个主题是一篇，就是他在做的文章，就是但是他就考量说，可能我们的对于那个戒律的理解没有，因为我们毕竟不是佛教学系嘛，所以他就在上个礼拜还又多花了时间，然后就又整理了一个延伸的，就是讲稿，就是他要介绍一下那个日本的戒律，不是日本的佛教戒律这样子。然后所以我们的第一个部分。我们今天讲座第一个部分就是他就是介绍这个佛教戒律，然后第二个部分才会是他的就是原来准备的那个研究。那所以我们会在那第一个部分就是你要看那个英文的这个讲义，然后我就没有翻成中文，但是它的第二个部分呢，我就有翻成中文的要点式的整理，所以你会马上来分享，会从英文开始，然后在两个主题之间，我们会有一个小小的就是停顿，然后大家可以，如果第一个部分没有听得很懂的话，就可以这时候先讨论一下这样。好，那大概是这样，我们就先请他开始了。So we are ready to hear your boring talk.
Oh, okay, that one. Okay, good. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for having me. This is a real pleasure. I think in a past life I did something very bad, so I was born in America. But in my next life, I hope to be reborn in Taiwan. So I'm trying to be good. So I wish I could give you this lecture in Chinese. I think it's better if it's not on. So this is a brief introduction to Buddhist precepts. And I should tell you there is a big difference between what the texts say you should do and what Buddhists actually do. That's the focus of a lot of my research. So first I'm going to tell you what you should do. So Buddhist precepts are at the basis of a lot of Buddhist thought. So, for example, Buddhists will talk about 3 types of training, and it always begins with morality. First, you have to be a moral person. Once you're a moral person, then you can meditate and then you can work on wisdom. Oh, there it is. This will take me a minute to figure this out. Another way of looking at this, here we go. Buddhist literature is divided into 3 baskets because they would put the Buddhist texts, which were written on the leaves of plants, things like that. and they would hold them in baskets. So one of those baskets is what we call Vinaya. So Vinaya is this extensive literature about what are the rules, how do you live a good life, if you violate a rule, how is it treated, what are the exceptions to rules, things like that. So what I'm sort of interested in is monastic discipline, a term that you could translate as Jiaxing. Sorry, I don't have any tones. As opposed to what the rules actually are. So every 2 weeks, Buddhist monks and nuns are supposed to gather and you recite a very brief version of the rules. Now for monks, in East Asia there were 250 rules. So obviously, if you're going to recite these, they must be very brief. So when you're reciting them, you really don't know too much about what they mean. You have to really study the commentaries. I mean, some of them are very obvious, but frequently they're not. So the Vinaya also has a type of literature called the Vibhanga, and that's a very extensive explanation of the rules, the definitions of terms, the story behind the rule, exceptions, problems, things like that. So because I frequently lecture at college campuses, I choose the very first rule as an example of how this works. So this is a rule that says, this is so good to be at a Catholic university. It says you should be celibate. Not too different from what Catholic priests are supposed to be. And just like Catholic priests, Buddhists sometimes weren't. So let me give you the example. You can start with the story behind the rule, which is a rather interesting story. For many of us, when you get to be 25 or 30 years old, and you go home, your parents say, we want a grandchild. And that's exactly what happens to this monk. He goes back to see his parents, and he was married, but then he wanted to become a monk, so he became a monk. And when he returns, his parents say, please have sex with your ex-wife, because we want a grandchild. And if we don't get a grandchild, then various bad things will happen. So he agrees to do this, but there is still no rule against this. So until a problem arises in Buddhism, the Buddha does not make a rule. So after he has sex with his ex-wife, and then he goes back, the Buddha says, that was a terrible thing you did. You would have done better to put your sexual organ in the mouth of a poisonous snake. So very fierce words, I think. But it shows you sort of Buddhist attitudes. The stories behind these rules are fascinating because they tell you what society was like almost 2,500 years ago. And obviously, everything has changed. So then you have various issues. What is sexual intercourse? How do you define it? And in this case, you know, if you think about some of our politicians in America, places like that, what does sex mean? We should ask Bill Clinton. These are not always the simplest things. So in Buddhist text, it means penetration to the depth of a sesame seed. But there would be other rules if there was no penetration and things like that. So very, very carefully defined rules. What if a person was raped? Would that be a violation? So if a nun was raped? And the answer is no. In that case, it's not a violation. But what if a woman were to have a lover, say a nun was to have a lover, and she would say, he keeps coming and raping me? Then that's discussed too. And the rule would say, there must be no enjoyment. So it's sort of looking at the way these rules are devised, it really tells you how serious Buddhists were about these things. If a young monk, say, fell completely in love with a woman and he just couldn't help himself. He is permitted to publicly reject the precepts. He says, I abandon them. That means he's no longer a monk. So if he were then to, say, have sex, it would not be a violation. But then later, if he wanted to come back to the order, they might hesitate to accept him. So all of these things sort of give you some idea of how, at least to me, this was very interesting material. So if you talk about lying, telling lies, all sorts of lies. Sometimes you tell a lie to save somebody, but other times it's for other reasons. So I'll give you one example. What is the worst lie you can tell in Buddhism? It's to lie about your spiritual achievements. So if a monk says, I'm enlightened, I'm the same as a Buddha, and he does this, he says this because he wants to get a lot of money, they would throw him out of the order. This is the worst type of lie. So spiritual leaders in all traditions have told such lies. It's not just Buddhists. In America we have Christian leaders who are quite terrible. So I'm only going to talk about the case of sex one more time. So what if a person, say the monk who went and he's had sex with his ex-wife, and this is the most innocent use of sex I can think of. He's having sex with his ex-wife, his parents have asked, he's ashamed. So for that type of person in the Vinaya, they actually allow an exception. And they say, well, in that case, he could remain with the order of monks and nuns. But he would forever be a novice. In other words, he would not be a full-fledged monk. But we would not kick him out. But if he violates it again, then we would. So they give people a second chance. One of the things I like about Buddhism is it is somewhat flexible with these things. For most violations, Buddhists dealt with it by saying you should confess. So Buddhist practice, particularly in East Asia, lots of confessions. Thinking you should do better in the future. Very little in the way of, say, physically punishing somebody. That's not in the Vinaya at all. But sometimes at individual monasteries, they would do that. So there's all sorts of things in this. This is a collection of chapters on things. So they tell you how to be ordained, how to become a novice, how do you criticize a monk who's violated a rule. So frequently, Buddhism loves the number 3. So they would say to the monk 3 times, you should stop this, you should stop this, you should stop this. If the monk refuses after 3 times, then he is violating the rule. Who is the senior-most monk or senior-most nun? It's always going to be the oldest. But frequently the oldest monk or nun is tired. Sometimes they don't think very clearly. So they can always give up their position to somebody younger who would do a better job. Rules about clothing, how do you make a good robe? So Buddhist monks and nuns were not supposed, they were supposed to actually use rags, and they would sew the rags together. So the robes were supposed to be useless. In a similar way, Buddhist monks and nuns shave their heads. Why do you shave your head? Because if you just look at fashion statements, you'll see the things we do with our hair, sort of, we hope it makes us beautiful or handsome or things like that. So you're sort of saying, no, I'm not in that world anymore. So these descriptions to me have always been interesting. So we'll talk a little bit about types of Buddhist practitioners, and then I'll talk about specific rules. So how do you become a Buddhist? You take what are called the 3 refuges. In other words, you say, in English, I put my faith in the Buddha, I put my faith in his teaching, I put my faith in the order of monks and nuns. It's interesting to be at a Catholic university because the use of the term faith, at least in English, is completely different. So in Buddhism, what you're saying is, I take the Buddha as my teacher. And if it doesn't work, you can leave. It doesn't matter. Buddhism is very tolerant. You have lots of chances, because if you don't become a good Buddhist in this life, you can be reborn, maybe do it in the next life. It's, I think, quite different from, say, Christianity, where you've got one chance. And so Buddhists did not stress faith nearly as much. Then there were 5 rules that a Buddhist layperson was supposed to observe. He was supposed to refrain from taking life. In other words, he should not be a butcher, he should not be a soldier, though frequently they were. He shouldn't steal, he shouldn't engage in sexual misconduct. What that means is, as long as he should not have sex outside of marriage, but within marriage, there was no problem for lay people. He shouldn't tell lies. And finally, the one that was always the most difficult for Chinese Buddhists to observe, particularly the men, he shouldn't drink alcohol. So some Chinese male Buddhists would only take 4 of these precepts. I think I would have fallen into that group. If you violate these, there's no order that judges you. Any punishment would be karmic. Okay, so that's going to be completely different from a full-fledged monk or nun. So we're going to skip some of this. I'm sorry I wrote way too much. So now you have monks, and so depending on the tradition, monks in Theravada tradition would take 227 precepts, in East Asia 250. The difference in number, it really doesn't mean much. The additional precepts for in the Chinese lineage are really pretty minor. To be ordained, you have to get 10 monks or 10 nuns in most places. So you would have one who is your preceptor, in other words, the person who teaches you about precepts, about morality. That's going to be like almost like your father or your mother. It's a very close relationship traditionally. Then you would have teachers. So maybe if your preceptor is not good at meditation, he would say, go see this person. And, excuse me. And then you have a master of ceremonies, the person who actually conducts the ceremony, the ordination, making you a monk. Then you need, depending on whether you're in the central area, far off area, between 2 to 7 witnesses. Why the witnesses? Because you needed somebody to say, yes, I was there when this person was ordained. So usually the witnesses are going to be younger, so they live longer. And they'll say, yes, this person was correctly ordained. Because Buddhist hierarchy is based on years of seniority. How many years have you been a monk or a nun? When they're ordaining you, they look at things. So a Buddhist monk or nun is supposed to be celibate, so you would think they wouldn't care if a person was, say, sexually, different. But they actually do. They want a normal functioning male or female. And at least in places like Tibet, the person to be ordained would climb up on a ladder, and then the senior monk would look under his robes and say, it's okay, he's a man. You have to have the permission of your parents, or if you're married, you have to have the permission of your husband or your wife. You cannot be a soldier. In other words, you cannot use the order as a way to escape from your responsibilities. So we're going to go back, and now we're going to look at, jump down here to the rationales for the precept. This is not the way the lineage is constructed. This is a modern way of looking at precepts. So I've skipped a couple of pages because I told you I wrote too much. But you could start by thinking about morality. I mean, that would be the obvious thing, right? So we all know it's bad to steal. It's bad to kill. It's bad to tell lies. Those are pretty obvious examples. But look at the others. a monk or nun was not supposed to farm because if you dig in the earth, you kill insects. So, except within the Chan tradition, monks and nuns did not farm. And that was considered to be a moral issue. You don't want to take life by digging. The next one is also funny, isn't it? A monk was not supposed to cook food. Here they mostly mean rice. Why not? Because if you cook the rice, if the monk cooks the rice, he is taking the life of future plants because he's cooking seeds. So, this is India 2,500 years ago. It seems very silly today, but it's interesting to look back and see how serious they were about not creating any bad karma at all. So, how did monks eat? Well, they went out and they begged. That was the big thing. So you went from house to house. You were not supposed to choose only the good houses. You had to go to all the houses in order. And so if you go to Southeast Asia today, to Myanmar, Laos, you'll still see monks going out begging. And it's really nice. I was in Laos, and I went very early in the morning, and the monks are all lined up according to their height. And so there are a lot of young boys, too. And so you have this pot or basket full of rice, and I have to put a little bit in each bowl. And I was trying very hard not to give too much too early, because then I wouldn't have any for the little boys at the end. But that was one way that they would eat. The other way is they had lay servants. So a monk was not supposed to say it would be noon pretty soon. Monks were not supposed to eat after the hour of noon. He couldn't say, please cook. So he had to sort of imply to the lay servant, it would be good if you cooked. So the sort of whole issue of not creating bad karma to me is very interesting. I put these two Chinese terms here. Things that are inherently moral. So those are rules like not lying. But there are a lot of rules that you'd say are sort of obstructing. They're based on the society you're in. So if you think about it, a monk was not supposed to have more than 3 robes. Is that really a moral issue? No, it really isn't. It really is an issue that depended on that society. And so Buddhists, very early on, were making that distinction about what these rules meant. Okay, second category, that is very important, is the maintenance of harmony in the order. And this term in Chinese I put in there for harmony, that's actually a term that's used for the order of monks and nuns.